Good morning. Today is Friday, April 22nd, 2022. It is 8:40 a.m. and this is a meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy on Bill H175, and that's related to the beverage container redemption system. We have a draft 1.1 dated 4/14/22, timestamp 9:14 a.m. That is our current draft. No changes at this point, but I think I have received, and I suspect others have received, questions about revising and submitting additional information. So, for instance, the witness today plus Claire Buckley wrote to the committee, and I spoke to other folks and asked them to get us feedback ASAP. So in terms of the development schedule, we're scheduled to meet on Monday afternoon, 3 to 5. In case there are other meetings going at the end of the day. And the goal is to take some additional testimonies to finish 175 and be in position to go to Barbara. If time allows, like we'll double back to 501. Bill on food residuals and repackaging, and finish that as well. For that, we don't have any draft. Mr. Reddy, did you have anything to present to us new since your work yesterday?
On 175?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ms. Crosby, you join us at the table. Good morning.
Morning. Well, thank you for having me back in to provide some additional testimony on H175. For the record, I'm Tim Crosby. I'm the Director of Environmental Compliance with Casella. So we recognize that there's a lot of systemic historical issues with the current bottle bill system that need to be addressed. However, I think it's pretty well known that Casella doesn't support expansion of the bottle bill system. We support fixing the issues, but not with the intent of an eventual expansion. The material that is being targeted by H175 is valuable to us, and it helps us sustain our operations at our facility. And without it, we would have to compensate for that loss, which means we'd have to increase the cost of recycling for all our Vermonters, which we don't want to do. Issues with the current system have been around for a long time, as I've said. They've been brought up for years in bottle bill stakeholder meetings that I was at. They've been referenced in testimony last year before the House. So I thank you for recognizing there are issues and not passing H175 as it came over from the House. Recognizing the issues is an important step in the right direction, but fixing them is going to take some time. We were able to listen to the discussion that took place on behalf of the working group that was appointed by this committee. However, when I got the invitation, they realized that I was only allowed to participate as an observer. I wasn't allowed to actively participate, and I think we should have been. We're directly impacted by this legislation, and we should have had a voice at that table.
Sure. Sorry, can I just ask a clarifying question? So when Mr. Chapman instructed the meeting, and when I talked to him before we started, or before we began then, he said he'd be providing time for, like there will be time at every meeting for those who weren't on the panel to participate in the discussion. We're going to any meeting and then have a new business.
Yeah,
that not happen?
I had like 30 seconds at the end of an hour and a half conversation to say something, and this is it's certainly not a big on match happening. It was tough to watch Beefberg have an active voice. He doesn't operate either system, and here I am in Casella, and I can't actively participate. So we heard reference to some form of compensation to the MRFs by a proposed producer responsibility organization, but it's unclear what that compensation will be and if it will be adequate enough not to have to increase the cost of recycling. Based on the discussion of the work group, there appeared to be some consensus on some of the issues, but it appears that there's still issues that have not been resolved and the consensus could not be reached. For example, the group recognized the need for dedicated oversight of the redemption system. However, there are many outstanding questions if a PRO is the right solution. Casella and other recyclers in Vermont are an impacted industry and should have participated in the discussion regardless of our participation status. We believe that the discussion on how to fix issues with the current volatile system and how recycling industries will be impacted needs to continue beyond this session and should include stakeholders from all impacted industries. Casella has made significant investments in Vermont's recycling infrastructure to help the state achieve its recycling and diversion goals. Any legislation that proposes to shift material away from our recycling facility jeopardizes existing and future investments. For example, on page 21 of the latest version of the bill, it asks the Agency of Natural Resources to submit a written report on whether glass wine bottles should or should not be included in the redemption system. So if Casella were to invest in additional glass processing equipment to produce recycled glass that can be made into a construction material, what happens to that investment is the agency recommends glass be taken out of the system and put in the bottle bill after a couple of years. I would like to reemphasize what I stated a couple weeks ago, that Vermont needs local solutions for managing glass. There are no bottle-to-bottle facilities in Vermont. Glass has to be trucked or sent by rail several hundred miles away. This is true whether it's MRF glass, glass collected within the bottle bill system, or glass collected separately at drop-offs. Glass can be broken, crushed, or pulverized and used for various types of construction materials, including replacement of virgin sand and road construction projects. Casella and other recyclers have worked with the Agency of Transportation on the use of recycled glass in local road construction projects. In addition to V-Trans, Glavel, a facility that makes foam glass, recently opened their facility in Essex and could be a good outlet for managing more of Vermont's glass. Supporting local uses reduces Vermont's carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, and is a far more sustainable option for managing this material. And our glass from Rutland is sent to a bottle-to-bottle facility today. It goes by rail all the way down to North Carolina to a company called Strategic, and they make bottle-to-bottle or fiberglass, which is the same uses that the bottle bill material is being made of. And our current aluminum and our PET bales are sold to the same markets that the bottle bill system uses. Earlier in the session, this committee visited a redemption center to see what the process entails. We would respectfully request that before a decision is made to expand the bottle bill system, the committee makes the same visit to one of our recycling facilities in Vermont to understand, gain a full understanding of the work that is done to separate, source, and process clean recycled bales. That's all I have. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
So as the program is developed, there's provisions for consultations with all stakeholders. Do you feel like that? And we recognize you're already a major part of the whole system out there. Do you feel like that consultation provision doesn't bring you into the process adequately?
It would going forward, certainly, but it wasn't adequate to develop this, but certainly going forward, we would be happy to participate in a working group going forward. Do you have
Specific edits that you would like to see considered for this bill?
Yeah, you remove the expanding the material. That's my edit. I think it's gonna. I just sat upstairs with a representative who told me he purchases wine bottles here in Vermont and takes them back in New York. I mean, how you're ever going to get the issue with fraud fixed is going to take a lot of time, and I don't even know how that will be addressed. Um, we operate a recycling facility in Maine, but that has an expanded volatile system. And what we see there is, in the absence of the valuable PET, we're left with a lot of the clamshells, which mills don't want, even though they carry the #1. So we'll have more bales that are of less quality, and when we have just clamshells in them, it degrades the quality of our bales, so we won't be able to sell them for as much as we would before. So understanding all of that is key to what our compensation is going to be needed if we do lose that material.
So, I mean, given that, let's say, if we don't enact the bill, you have found that it's such a unattractive proposition to you don't have edits to this bill.
I'll go through it again. I mean, I do support fixing the current system. It is a mess. But it's been going on for a long time, and so I don't think you can do it that's something that's going to cure itself overnight. But I don't want it. We don't want it to be fixed just with the intent of taking material away from us and putting it in that system when those containers are already being recycled today. Very little is being discarded, according to the data that was in the studies that have been done.
Any quick questions for Ms. Crosby?
Well, just a comment that the name Casella has shown up constantly in our conversations. And I took it for granted that they had been part of the process of developing this bill. I guess I had no actual objective reason to think that. Well, but the fact that the name conversation comes all the time, we're having about Casella. So I'm surprised to learn that they weren't part of it.
Well, so we discussed as a committee and then wrote on the whiteboard the names of all the parties who were part of that small work group. And then, in consultation with Mr. Chapman, he said, well, I'll make sure there's a new business section or something like that at every meeting so that even beyond the 5 that were on the panel, that the stakeholders would have an opportunity to participate. So I'm sorry to hear that your participation was too limited, and I wasn't observing those meetings. I think they generally happened while we were.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Mr. O'Grady is the drafter of the bill. You have, other than Mr. Chapman, you have the best knowledge of the bill. So, in terms of, if you could just join us for a moment, the opportunities for stakeholders to engage, there's a section related to that on page 13, in section 1532, which is about the stewardship plan and minimum requirements. Does anything else come on about making sure that all parties with an interest in how such a program might be designed and developed will have an opportunity to participate?
Well, it is subject to the standard notice and comment procedures for type 4 proceeding.
Yeah.
So that allows for notice and comment. And that is on page 16 going on to page 17 and 18. That's for the plan.
Yeah.
That's not for say how municipality or redemption is going to deal with the expansion of the system.
There's also an implementation study. So beyond the explicit call out for the glass wine bottle to be included. It's leading to see if
Right,
the questions are more open than only that question.
yes, it's about small containers, glass and wine. That's really, it's about small containers of glass and wine.
Making a note of my copy to think about, I don't know if this is the right place, but to be more explicit about the relationship of this program to the non-bottle system, the single stream system. Okay. Any questions for Mr. O'Grady? So the goal is that to return to this bill on Monday. Again, I ask people to submit. There'll be people invited in, but also to submit written suggestions. I said, rather than just comments, it would be helpful. Comments are fine, but if, in the end, we're editing a bill. So if you have edits to the bill that solve the issue that you're making a comment on, please send those as well. And I ask people to send them to everyone in the committee as well as directly to Mr. O'Grady, so we could keep everyone current.
Could I just for your information, the bill by rule will need to go to finance and appropriations if it remains in its current state, because it has fees that impact revenue, and it changes appropriations specifically to the Clean Water Fund and to the Waste Management Assistance Fund.
Thank you very much. With that, we are on schedule to move on to H697. Thank you. And that bill is H697, enact relating to eligibility of reserve forest land for enrollment in the youth program. There's a brief amendment that I have draft. Here's the bill as well.
Yeah.
But the reason for this was the testimony I said that we heard from Secretary and Commissioner Wood, as well as Bill Fair and Ed Morris. Thank you. Their expression of concern of what might be the impact of enrolling land in the reserve forest category, availability of forest land for regular collective harvesting. So there's a report in the bill, and maybe it would have practiced, maybe not, but the requested edit is to add this phrase, including any relevant information regarding any impact to the overall managed forest land category. So that as the program continues and we get a report, there'll be an opportunity to see if there is any impact that people were concerned about, but no one knows if it would happen that way. The example that was cited as to counter the notion that too much land would leave the productive category is the enrollment in ESTAs has been relatively limited, I think, over about 11,000 acres since that was made available. So anyone knows how it would unfold. And so this would be a helpful edit to help us make sure the report addresses that explicitly. That's it. And I'm not sure. Well, in inserts, sorry, in terms of where it inserts, can you give us the page number?
Sure, it's on page 15 of the bill. The as passed by. It's in subdivision section, it's in section 4, subdivision 3. And the whole subdivision would now read any other information that the commissioner determines is relevant to the ongoing enrollment of reserve forest land, the use value of appraisal program, including any relevant information regarding any impacts to the overall managed forest land category.
The other part I had, although it seems like it's premature to change anything, as we get the report in 26. From everything I've heard and observed over the years about people enrolling, these changes are slow. So reports back in 26, maybe it becomes part of an annual assessment. So that if we ever had concerns about how much reserve forest land was being created, that program could be adjusted. So at any rate, that was the amendment I wanted to offer here in committee. I don't know how many members feel like that's a useful edit to make, or other suggestions.
I think some of the witnesses from whom we've heard already have a set of pretty strong opinions about how this will affect logging, silvicultural land. I don't suppose they'll be particularly grateful for this, but it does seem to me that it's taking their concerns seriously, and it does open the possibility in the future, if it turns out that they're right, and this actually does have a deleterious effect on logging. That could be an avenue for them. I don't think too many people manage their land for timber for the purposes of getting into current use. I think they do it mainly just to get some money out of it. Probably use most of that money to pay the taxes. Keeping the taxes down expedites more than incentives.
So in the bill, reserve forest land, it can be an entire parcel. It sounds like that was one of the unique features as opposed to just a portion of a larger parcel. But
Yes, that's the distinction between the major distinction between enrolling as managed forest land and then enrolling part of that parcel as an ESTA. Because you need at least 20 acres of managed productive forest land on any current parcel right now. So say you're going to enroll a 50-acre parcel. At least 20 acres of that have to be productive forest land. The other 30 could be ESTA, right? But it can't be the entire parcel. Now, if you meet the eligibility requirements for reserve forest land on that parcel, 30% of one of the significant categories, you can enroll, but you're going to have to manage it according to the reserve forest land plan and the standards for that the commissioner comes up with. Doesn't mean you never cut on it, because you have to do some management for invasive, disease, etc. But it's largely going to be non-productive.
And then it's not that all forest land is eligible for reserve forest land and criteria for being accepted into that program.
Right. If you look at the commissioner's report, you need, I can find it for you exactly if you would like.
Thank you.
Unless you're on file. Parcels become eligible for enrollment in reserve forest when they demonstrate that 30% or more of the parcel acres to be enrolled in UVA are comprised by significant and sensitive conditions.
Okay, you want?
The report, I'm on page 16, and it's the bolded language on page 16. And so potential eligible significant and sensitive conditions are riparian areas, vernal pools, natural communities of statewide significance, rare, threatened, and endangered species, old forests, forested wetlands, special places and sensitive sites, site for land, and steep slopes. So 30% of those acres that you're going to enroll on that parcel have to be one or more of those things.
Any questions from survey? It is so the eligibility for enrollment in terms of the quality of the land has to demonstrate either ESTA, non-reserve forest land or reserve forest land. It's got to be more than 30% of the same criteria. It's just the portion of the parcel.
Right. It's not the exact same criteria. Many of the sensitive significant are the same as ESTA, but then you get site for land, which is that land that just doesn't, it's not really conducive for timber management or timber production. And then the steep slopes, which may be conducive to timber growth, but not timber harvesting. So those are two important additional categories that are added to the sensitive or significant areas.
So sorry, what was the first one you said?
Site for land. It's land. It's not. There's a category called open land. It's not open land. It's land that there is some production on it or some growth on it, but it's not conducive for long-term growth and management of production.
And I was under the impression steep slopes could already be excluded because of the risk of erosion, for instance, harvesting and steep slopes, etc.
It might be excluded from your plan and your requirement to harvest on it, right? Because because of under the AMPs, it might not be something that you can manage the erosion from and meet the water quality requirements on those steep slopes.
So you're gonna have to back up and repeat this again. So if I've got a land that would fit into an ESTA, how does this expand that? Besides steep slopes and those
Site for land.
what and site for the definition of that is what?
I'm going to read from the table that they have of potential eligible, significant, and sensitive conditions. I don't think it's the exact definition, but it's close enough.
Okay.
It's areas consisting of soils classified as site 4 with relatively poor tree growth potential by soils or site index.
And Estes only are pieces of land that are pretty good growing.
Well, ESTA has a definition, it's in 697, for purposes of distinction from reserve forest land. It is land within a parcel of managed forest land within a parcel that will be managed using protective or conservation management strategies and are not required to be managed for timber, including old forests, state significant natural communities, rare, threatened, and endangered species, riparian areas, forested wetlands, and vernal pools.
So this expansion really is just steep slopes in those class 4.
Those are the additional areas that would help you meet the 30% threshold for enrolling the entire parcel.
Okay.
So 30% of that parcel is one of those significant or sensitive areas. You get to enroll the entire parcel as reserve forest.
And it's just keep the design and everything clear. That's sort of the mirror image in a way of Estes as part of a parcel that's in a process, not reserve forest. You can't have more than 30% of the parcel classified as an Estes.
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
So in the past, you couldn't have more than 20% of your parcel as an ESTA. But the General Assembly gave the Commissioner of Forest and Parks the discretion to allow more than 20% of a parcel to be in ESTA. And so what generally the use manual says is that if you are less than 20%, you're basically going to get approved automatically as an ESTA. But if you're going to be more than 20%, the commissioner has to approve that. So the commissioner can approve, and there's no limit, like percentage limit for the commissioner's approval. It's a more of a narrative limit for the determination of the appropriate designation.
Okay, so there's no limit then.
Well, there is a limit because at least 20% of 20 acres, at least 20 acres have to be available for productive timber management. So you can't put that entire parcel into an ESTA. You can't, it has to be managed, 20 acres at least have to be managed for productive management.
So you have a larger, I drive home through Route 12 and the Myers still own umpteen 1,000 acres through to between Herringham. So presently they can only they could only enroll 20% of that land as an ESTA.
Automatically, if they wanted to enroll more of that, they would have to get the commissioner's approval.
But they would have to. So umpteen 1,000 acres, or you got 1,000 acres. If you get over 300 acres that fit these categories now, you could just say, I want my whole 1,000 acres taken out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on 1,000-acre parcel and 300 acres qualify as significant and sensitive, you could enroll as reserve forest. And yes. You're going to need to.
I'm just trying to figure out what,
You're going to need to meet the reserve forest land management standards. But yes, you're going to have to. You could qualify.
okay. So on the 1,000-acre, under current law, 1,000 acres, you spend at least 30% of them are.
Under current law, 20 acres need to be used for productive management. 20% gets the automatic ESTA, but the commissioner can approve more than 20%. You might also have site for land on that parcel. You might also have open land on that parcel. But you can still qualify for use of that.
But if from practical, how many pieces of land is the commissioner ever approved?
For more than 20%?
Yeah.
Well, as I think the chair said earlier, not that many acres have been enrolled as ESTA, so it's probably, I don't know the number of parcels used, I don't know, but I know that there are not that many acres in total in an ESTA.
So it seems like it's just a simple rule, but I just want to keep going through it, make sure you have it straight. So in the case of theoretically, you could have 1,000-acre parcel, its qualities qualified as an ESTA. You could keep just 20 acres in current production, and the balance could all conceivably be an ESTA, but that would require the commissioners to have approval.
Yes.
And the new version, so that would have been 100% of those 980 acres have qualified. The new version, 30% of those acres qualify as reserve forest land. Then the whole parcel can go in.
Right. And remember, the department has set a goal for the different percentage of the statewide forest that it wants throughout the state in order to maintain healthy forests and all the benefits that they provide. All the benefits they provide, all the benefits they provide. Their goal is 9% for old growth, and they are at approximately 2%. A little more than 2%, but this will help them achieve that goal. But at the same time, they don't believe that it's going to lead to just a mass conversion from managed forest land to reserve forest land. And I think the way that the commissioner is envisioning, the reimbursement rate will be the same. Right, so you don't have an incentive to try to game the system of enrolling in managed forest land this year, cutting, and then transferring back to reserve forest land because the tax rate is less on that land. The tax rates are going to be the same, so there's no incentive to gain. Plus, Senator McCormick referenced the fact why people will want to potentially keep their land as managed forest land, because many people, especially those with, I wouldn't say that they're small parcels, but they're not the huge parcels, they manage their forest land to help pay the taxes on it, right? They take the timber off the land to get some profit off the land. You're not going to be getting much profit, if any, off of reserve forest. So there's not gonna be that, the incentive to keep your land as managed forest land will still be there for that revenue generation component.
See, I disagree with that totally. Most people, the benefit in being in the current use program is the tax reduction, and most people enter the program for the tax reduction. And then they deal with their forester, and the forester says, you need to manage.
Be eligible.
And to be eligible for the current use program. And that's why most people get in the program. You log once every 15, 20 years or longer, depending on who you bought it. Quite frequently when people buy pieces of land and they buy it from somebody that has already cut the crap out of the piece. And the land sits there for 30 years and really doesn't, but the reason people go in with a management plan is to get the benefit of the current use program, because that's where the money is.
I entirely agree with you. I agree.
So, I use our home farm, I pay 15,000 in property tax. My property tax would be nearly 50. I couldn't keep the land open without being in the current use program. We have to have a management plan, and that's why we do it. So,
A typical example of that,
yeah,
of someone whose folks bought high-graded property that was acres of spindly trees that were crowding each other out. And
Yeah.
50 years later, there's timber there that is available for lumber.
it's taken 50 years.
And I had it, I harvested it for portions of it for lumber and some for chips, and insulated my house and put in heat pumps with the proceeds. I remember when we, this legislature, talked about if someone could go out and magically cut half the trees in the state of Vermont down and let them rot. 30 years later, the timber value would be much greater than if we hadn't gone out and cut down 50% of the trees and let them rot, because we would have opened up the sunlight, they would have grown straighter, they would have been more marketable, they would have been healthier, and they would have provided, sawmills and things like that with resources. It's been an economic winner for.
Oh, and it didn't hurt the forest.
Pardon?
And it didn't hurt.
Oh, no, it didn't. The forests were stymied, competing in a ghetto
They were crowding each other out.
of fighting for resources.
And so the overall driver for this bill, and sort of step back away, is the Vermont conservation design. The goal of getting to 9% and seeing Enrolling at 2%, saying is there a way to bring more suitable old forest land into the program?
Yeah.
Encourage that people manage to that. When you were saying there will be limited income, is that because under the reserve forest thing? Although there's some, it's not that you don't do anything, but you're not, your plan isn't oriented to harvesting for income, it's harvesting going forest out or
Right.
artificial forest.
Basically, for ourselves,
It's been very helpful to go through it again. Any other questions from Mr. Brady or concerns? This is a really important bill. We're talking about forest land, which, I handle carefully, so I don't want to be in a rush. I certainly don't, if it's really steep, anywhere near a river, I think of Route 12 driving there on Elmore. because we all think of what, and, you know, there's a pretty significant stream all the way down through there. I want them to be able to take that stream all the way up through and have proper setbacks and all of that. I just, if a big piece of land like that, if I say, oh, it's 1,000 acres, you get 300, you can take the whole thing out. I'm not sure how I feel about that. You know, if it's a little piece of land, 30, 40 acres, and you've got a big piece of wetland, I can see where it would be integral to have some boundary land around all of that, but I'm not,
I know, this is not, your concerns are not a new concern for you. I mean, I've been here for almost 20 years and I've heard you mention concerns about the parking of land many times. And so,
I don't like the parking plan, you know, I don't mind the parking of land for if it's steep, if it's near, I mean, there's a whole bunch of, and I haven't got all the terms that other people have, but, and, you know, frankly, if it's old growth and has so little, but I don't want to, at the same respect, I don't want to encourage parking just for parking itself. Well, so I agree with that. I think, you know, so I take up is that because there are criteria for being accepted in, granted, it has to be at least 30%, so it's not the entire parcel. But that it's a tool to get that land enrolled without the pressure of a harvesting plan or to managing it as forest for forest sake, I guess, you know, because of all the other things. But yeah, I mean, and that's part of why I think the report is essential, and even adding, you know, over the small thing, to say we want to watch the impact. Other uses, of course. So let's just see where we're at this point for support for 697 comfort moving it. Senator McDonald, is this something we'd like to advance at this point? More or less?
I'm curious, I've asked myself what harm can this do? The biggest challenge I thought that we as a legislature tackled about 10 years ago that we had sort of unexpected when we did our hearings was how much of the land that has been in forestry for 40 or 50 years, the people that own that land were dying off and it was being split up and inherited often by children and grandchildren that didn't live here, who liquidated the assets on that land without regard to the long-term forest benefits that had accrued, which and we made some changes which were difficult. I think Senator Russell and I wrestled against. You know, we disagreed. Here we are, 10 or 15 years later, in general agreement.
Well, I like the idea of some forest land not being accessible, just left free, and if there are tax incentives for landowners to do that, and I don't know if they need the incentive. I think there are a lot of people who would like to do that just can't afford to because of the taxes. And if we remove the incentive. I mean, not well thought through law, it's not a bad thing for a forest, but there is something else when you just leave it alone. I think there, so I'm in favor of it.
So, Senator McDonald, I wasn't, now that I think about it, in the end, are you supportive of, you said, can't see the harm.
Yeah, yes, I think that a recurring question will be if you put old growth in, what's the commitment to the old growth? I mean, how long can it be old growth and unmanaged for 20 years and then someone say, well, I'll change my mind and go through and harvest it all?
So
Would we,
I haven't thought about
I
that.
don't, well, when we do think about it, we ought to be thinking about it. That's gonna happen. We may not be here, but that issue is gonna come up. And we ought to have some inkling of an idea of how it might be resolved, or at least tell our colleagues that that's a problem that's unresolved.
You can, sorry, I just want to check, the bill allows you to enroll and change categories, right?
That's correct.
So you could enroll and become, before you went up and asked, you could take your property out of, or you could have your forest plan say, pick any number of acres you want. I'm in a category where I don't have to manage.
So you have to manage for reserve forest.
I can manage for reserve forest land or whatever that might look like. And once every 10 years, you have your plan redone with your forester. You could make a decision in 20 years that that isn't what you want to do anymore. And so you could go in and cut your old growth forest if you redid your management plan.
Right, you would need a new forest management plan for productive management.
So you've done none of the work that other people have done to manage their forest and
You've done different work, right? You still
It
have.
might not be as valuable of a source.
Right.
well,
Harvest
yeah,
as much as the people
right.
invested in that extra work.
Well, I just redid my 10-year management plan. And by sections of the land and based upon what it all is, we had to have everything assessed, and I just put $4,000 into redoing for 2 pieces of land. I just put $4,000 into redoing. It's very expensive to do that. And okay. But it's a wholly different category if you've reached where 30%, and then you just say, it's a much lighter touch for management.
Right. Well,
And
we don't particularly know yet because the commissioner hasn't issued what they're going to be, but they are summarized in his report.
management for environmental targets, I mean, it's designed to keep it a healthy forest, not a healthy, not maximize its health for anticipated targets.
Right.
I would just say for this, yeah, I like the idea of this. I don't like that. I don't like, if we're in the category of protecting an old growth forest and we get up to 9%, which they want, and we've let people do a lighter touch in their management and all of that, that they just somebody sells the property and then they get to pull it out. I don't like that. I'm not clear that the limits are right. 30% qualifies you to enroll, and then the rest, the other 70%. Or, well, if I got a big piece of land and because I got 300 and I got 1,000 acres, I can just take 700 and let it just sit there. I'm not sure how we feel about that.
And the other unknown is the ash trees are all done. I try to imagine what the forest is going to look like when they begin to come down.
Yeah.
And what's the plan for that? Well, some would say that we should be burning that wood before it's totally rotten as chips as part of our transition and clean heat and all of that. And the Commissioner Forest Parks has acknowledged that we probably ought to be doing that. We don't have a plan.
Well, also old forests do have a lifespan where, you know, the old trees eventually die naturally. There's something to be said for harvesting them, since they're gonna die anyway. Get them out of wood still good.
We're gonna have trouble getting it. It's gonna be something we have yet to imagine and experience.
But the ash trees are dying because of the borers.
Yeah, we can't stop it.
Right, and so that's something where under a reserve forest management plan, you likely will be able to cut for that to preserve the forest health.
Oh, you would?
Right,
Okay.
because to prevent invasive spread, prevent disease.
What about
You're
just
not
a tree
gonna
that is
prevent the disease, you're gonna use the,
Well, it's what you do.
read
with-
some of the cash value of the burnable wood, if you have a plan to put it in people's homes to
Right,
transition away from traditional oil and propane to get to whatever is gonna be
Is that
the
a,
next.
is that an amendment to this, your plan, the same way we do now?
Is it a what?
An amendment to the plan, because for a lot of people that have had to cut, have gone in and tried to cut all their ash trees to get ahead of this. They've gone in and amended their management plan.
Well, that's the thing. I think part of the conditions for enrollment will allow for you to have a management plan that allows for the cutting for invasives and forest health. So that is what specifically will be allowed is unknown as of yet, because the commissioner hasn't finalized what those would be. The forest management standard will be refined to describe invasive plant presence more objectively and consistently in forest stands to establish a baseline against which to measure success. So we recommend that the landowner would need to engage in restorative management to address harms on the landscape, including managing invasive plants and correcting water quality and soil erosion concerns. So there's going to be management for that.
So it feels to me like we're not quite ready for a vote. And who would we like to hear from to talk about this further? I'm thinking Commissioner Snyder. Yeah, visit with him again. Now that we've had more time to digest it and come up with a new round of questions. Anyone else that anyone in the would like to hear? I'd just say part of my worry in all of this is they live in a county that almost every community used to have a sawmill when I was growing up. And if I go back 40 years, and for me, the forest products industry here is grasping its last breaths. There's very few there's very few sawmills and very few timber mills, and the furniture business is a shadow of what it was itself here. And that plays into the, it being lucrative enough for somebody to be able to sell that timber to do what you talked about.
Yeah.
You know, it's harder and harder to sell your timber and keep that managed. You know, this plays into that to some degree. And I'm just.
Yeah, I disagree on some of Senator Westman's conclusions, and mine were members of everybody. Both farmers harvest timber, but they did it after haying before they cut oats, and they did it for shorter periods of time. Our timber industry today are few people, a lot of machines that harvest months and months and months of the year, and that's their profession.
Yes, but they sell their timber for less.
And
And
they haul it farther
And they.
to fewer mills.
It's mostly out of state. They're, you know, it's mostly out of state. And the value added products of the forest products industry that was here is, you know, I look at the little village of Jeff, Bell Gates Lumber, cut a bunch of hardwood, maple products to go to Steinway pianos.
Or to brushes.
Yeah.
Northfield have brush factories that made 50 different types of brushes. But we're getting. We can go on.
I get it, but you know.
But it was local.
Yeah.
It was local.
There's still, among other things, a coffin factory and a clothespin factory.
Yeah.
All sorts of things.
Well, Richford had coffee sticks and had Sweat and Company furniture, and it's all gone. And I don't think the community's better for it.
So, all right, so thank you. I think that we're,
Same thing with creameries.
and although I'm not on that farm anymore, we had
I hate to sound
65
like
acres was lot, same thing. So, you know, experience with it, and wanting to share. There it is. Thank you, Mr. O'Grady.
I think this big centralization and stuff is.
Mr. Kowski, so, we are moving on, so I'll reach out to Commissioner Snyder about the testimonies and we can go and mull it over and we'll come to a decision next week.
So can I just ask you, one of the questions I would like to ask you is, how did they come up with those parameters?
You like over 30%.
Yeah.
That's qualified for the entire parcel.
And compared to what?
Okay, so that's a good. Commissioner, I think Commissioner Snyder's away because, but he's, I'll check with him and see if he's back next week or continue.
It's school vacation, and he took his daughter to the museums in Philadelphia.
I'm waiting for it.
Kind enough to make himself available by text, even as things have been happening in the last couple of days. So, okay, well, with that, so we're moving on to H606, an act related to community resilience and biodiversity protection, also known as the 30 by 30. We had I think my sense of where we paused was Ms. Oates from Nature Conservancy came in and presented language about including aquatic species in the definitions. I think my sense was there was sort of general nodding around the table, like, oh, well, right, you're conserving land permanently. We are interested in supporting everything that lives there, so why not round up and include aquatic species? So what sounded like a straightforward thing, I think I've come to learn that it's more complicated than that, and I wanted to offer some help on assessing how practicable that is to add to film.
I'll check out the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm not sure I can help you with that. I think you heard testimony from the secretary yesterday. If you want to add water to this, I have drafted it as was requested. I don't know how to, I don't know anything about what is being proposed personally. I don't work on water issues at all. I don't really know how you permanently conserve water. And I also don't know the interaction between permanently conserving water and the overlap with the public trust. I don't really have,
We've been moving back and forth between those. I don't remember if you were here or you had opportunity to listen to the secretary's testimony on this issue.
the water issue.
Yeah, the proposal.
Yeah, I think she testified yesterday that I don't know. No.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to spot, I just want, my sense was that, the secretary made clear that it's an entirely different sort of program, body of law, et cetera, so that you can't simply, the program design, my recollection is that the program designed for terrestrial conservation don't just carry over to bodies of water and aquatic species. So that being the case, was not to add that the amendment that we have offered by those folks. I don't know. And the committee has, we heard from, as you said, that we heard from the secretary who advised against it. And I don't know if the committee has further questions about, that was the only thing that came up, the 11th hour. The proposal to add that, problematic. The other thing is, this is the early stage of a long-term program to manage for conservation. 30 by 30 is on its way to 50 by 50, is that correct? Yeah. So that there is ample time to revisit that and see if aquatic species could be included once the program is underway. So does anyone have questions or concerns about page 606? And if anyone would want to consider further amendments. There was, just to be clear, the secretary also said that they wanted to soften the language about conservation. I guess I might say overall, it didn't necessarily focus on permanent conservation, but address other terrestrial conservation tools. And my sense was that, and maybe you can have a this, I don't know that the permanent conservation envisioned by the program diminishes the ability of those other conservation tools to use in and of themselves, other than if your permanent conservation is one of the more expensive ways of achieving conservation. So if you are expending more of your budget on permanent conservation, you may have less money available to do other approaches. That was the only connection I became aware of. I don't know if you have anything else that you might be able to offer.
The permanent conservation is sort of the core of this bill. So you can change that, but it's stated throughout that the 30 by 30 goal is 30% of land permanently conserved. That is potentially, it's a more substantial ask of landowners. It could be more difficult to achieve, but that is, if you changed it to non-permanent land, I'm speculating, but it seems like the 30% goal would potentially already be reached. There are a fairly significant amount of land that's in non-permanent conservation already, so that is just that's a policy consideration if you want it to be permanent conservation or not. Less than permanent conservation.
The other thing too, just to bring on three members, so maybe it would be good to go to the part of the bill and talk about, you could just maybe walk us through from 2802 conservation goal and then the conservation plan. The actions are the development of plan.
Yes.
So,
Excuse me, the actions are the development of the plan.
yes, to get us on, figure out how we would get to 35 years. And 55.
Yes, so the two components of this bill are that it establishes a goal for the state to achieve 30% permanent conservation of the land of Vermont by 2030. And then 50% of the land permanently conserved by 2050. And then it directs the secretary to come up with a plan on how that can be achieved. Do you want me to walk through the languages introduced, or are you interested in looking at the amendment as proposed by Ms. Oates?
No, I think to speak of the languages introduced.
Okay.
The amendment is introduced or the bill?
The bill.
Yeah, I'd like a walk through that. I'm generally more comfortable with 30,000 feet than getting into the details. I do recognize the devil is in the details. At some point, I have to do that, often asking staff or advocates for some help. In this case, the bill strikes me as not being at 30,000 feet, it's sort of in low Earth orbit. It's a very much a big picture thing. And the phrase, the action we're taking is to set up a plan. Well, a plan is not action. A plan precedes action. Okay. And I'm wondering if the bill actually does anything. So that's the question I have as you walk us through. If you can tailor that to address the, what is that? What are we actually doing? Because it looks to me like we're sort of saying we work as our mother and so forth and do good things.
So,
Yeah, just define it action. I mean, what does the bill do? And the
Yeah.
bill
Yes.
Constantly stuff a plan to be written. But so let's walk through that. If we could maybe start at 2802.
sure, yeah, so on page 5, 2802 conservation goals, and so, yeah, 30% of Vermont's total land area shall be conserved by 2030, and 50% of the state's total land area shall be conserved by 2050. The Secretary of Natural Resources shall assist the state in achieving these goals. The land conserved shall include state, federal, municipal, and private land. So municipal and private land count towards these goals. So this is not directing the state to seize land, or it allows that the ANR going to count all the different types of land that are being conserved by various parties.
So if the development rights are going on a private piece of land and but it
And I'll go back to what we just talked about. It's a piece of forest. And it has a management plan and it's being forced. Would that fit as conserved under this?
If it's permanently conserved, yes.
If the development rights have been.
Yeah, permanently, yeah. Yeah, and so timber harvest, management plans are allowed.
It's just, okay. And do we know where we are now?
There's been testimony, they don't have exact numbers, somewhere between, I think, 22 and 26%. Is what is estimated right now. So reaching 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050 shall include a mix of ecological reserve areas, biodiversity conservation areas, and natural resource management areas. Those are the defined terms that have a varying level of restriction on them. In order to support an ecologically functional landscape with sustainable production of natural resources and recreational opportunities, the approximate percentages of each type of conservation category shall be guided by the conservation targets within Vermont conservation design, including the use of ecological reserve areas to protect highest priority natural communities and to maintain or restore old forests.
Okay. So these are, we're here for Sears' birthday, but Brian gave me the tip off, so you guys get the remainder. We get the remainder? Thank you. On the basic. Thanks.
Right to be in.
Remains of the day.
So it's directing that there is a state goal, 30 by 30, 50 by 50. And then section 23803 directs the secretary to create a plan on how to reach this. So at the bottom of page 5, on or before December 31st, 2023, the secretary shall develop a plan to implement the conservation goals of Vermont conservation design to meet the goals established in 2802. The plan shall be submitted to House Natural Committee on Ag and Forestry, Energy and Technology, and then this committee. The plan shall include, okay, a review of the 3 conservation categories defined in this title, suggestions for modifications and additions to those categories, an initial inventory of the amount of land in Vermont that is permanently conserved, and to the extent practical, the amount of permanently conserved land that generally falls into each of the 3 conservation categories defined in this chapter, including public and private land. So A&R is going to first look at the categories as they've been defined in this bill and make suggestions if they need to be changed. They're going to then do an initial inventory on the amount of land in Vermont so we can get a firm number on what the percentages of conserved land actually are already, including public and private land. C has an evaluation of the impact of intergenerational land transfer trends, a summary of the totality of conservation practices available for reaching the goals of this chapter, including what they are, what they do, how they contribute, and what metrics are available to quantify them. So that's looking at the full array of conservation practices. An assessment on how state land will be used to increase ecological reserve areas. An implementation method for achieving the goals of the chapter using Vermont conservation design as a guide. And so the agency has already developed Vermont conservation design, and this is directly linking to the work being done here, being guided by Vermont conservation design. An inventory and assessment of existing programs that will be used to meet the permanent non-convergent conservation goals of this chapter, and recommendations for new programs that will be needed to meet the goals. And an assessment of existing funding and recommendations for new funding sources that will be needed for acquisition of land, staffing capacity, and long-term stewardship of the goals. So as A&R looks at the amount of land that's already conserved, they will then need to look at what existing programs that are in the state for conserving land, what existing funding sources there are for conserving land, and what new programs and funding sources may be needed to further assist the state in reaching the conservation goals. And then there's a stakeholder process for developing the plan.
So other than Ms. Oaks' feedback about plot species, which now that we've heard from the secretary, it's not an easy fit into it. And the secretary presented language around changing the definition of conserve, so it would include that conserve would include non-conservation. Because the plan starts with a review of the three conservation categories in section 2001, suggestions for modifications or additions to that can seem like the place where that conversation would naturally fit, but given that that part of the bill is focused on permanent conservation, it would seem incongruous to change the definition at the outset rather than let the process that we examine categories and the definitions as part of the plan making. And I guess, all the way back at the beginning, just a little bit like the 697, trying to better support the development of reserve forest land. This one's driven by Vermont Conservation Design as well. We have this goal where how are we going to achieve it? Let's be systematic. So, I myself, to make this easier rather than just asking other people, I myself am comfortable with the bill as is given the discussions we've had so far. I don't know how other people are, so Deborah McCormick?
I don't think I'll do any harm.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it'll actually accomplish.
Well,
So permanent conservation through conservation easements is happening every day. I'm not advocating for this bill. However, this is mandating that the state create a plan for conservation and directing that the conservation plan be guided by Vermont Conservation Design, which is a program the agency developed years ago that has very detailed information on the natural communities in Vermont. So this will be hopefully providing some direction to conservation efforts that are already happening.
I mean, to your point, I would say we came up with this overarching design. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a significant document. It includes a lot of digital mapping that's accessed by. Then the next step, I think, that naturally follows. Well, okay, so how do you implement it? And that's the question here. And then to your point, okay, so plan is not implementation, but I don't know how you'd ever jump to full-fledged implementation without a plan. So it's another step along to like maybe slower than people. Senator Weston, any thoughts on the bill?
I'm going to support the bill. The only thing I disagree with is some of the comments that they put in the navigation, but I'll take that as down. The place where it says human activity has altered almost 75% of the Earth's surface, I would say with global warming, and altered more than that.
What finding is that?
That is number 4 on page 2, toward the top. That's still here.
Yeah, it's on page 1 of the bill, attached by the House.
Okay, it's page one. But I'm not going to argue with United Nations. They're a little bigger than me.
Well, is this language been agreed according to the United Nations? Is there language? I mean, the word they caught me out was squeezing.
Yes.
Okay. Descriptive. Right.
Yes, I can provide the citations.
Just one more. All right, and then, Commissioner McDonald,
The idea of permanently preserving, so I was just going, Googled up, trying to Google what the man first went to 30,000 feet, which is what we talk to each other about viewing from these days. Haven't got there yet. Just the whole idea of permanent system, permanently preserving. So fraught with hubris that I don't know how to deal with it.
and you have to have a caveat, until the next ice age.
I think what we're dealing with is the symptom of realizing we've exhausted the Earth's resources that are great for this unsustainable. And trying to react to it.
So it sounds like, you know, pretty, I'm sorry,
There were other things that this problem of preservation are much more, require much more immediate action. But if, the grand scheme of things, it all requires action. So I'm just blathering here on a Friday morning.
I'll move the bill.
okay, so, yeah, no amendments to it, or just.
On a sunny spring Friday
Can
morning.
you serve as a person? Sorry, person.
Where's the slacker?
Oh, we're not gonna preserve water. I'm sorry.
Well,
No,
I don't,
Okay,
we're gonna drink all of it.
makes it easier.
so the motion is to vote favorably, report favorably H606 as passed by the House.
So,
Any further discussion on this? We could call the roll, please.
Campion's not here. McDonald,
Yes.
McCormick,
Yes.
Weston, yes. Senator Gray,
Yes. Okay, we'll leave it open, try to get vote. Campion, when he comes back, he's getting back before we adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Kowski.
A car outraced a horse 95 years ago.
We're learning so much today.
Did we save any pastry for the ladies?
Yeah, good idea. Okay, so our next bill.
Thank you.
there's a big something in there.
But that might be for Campion.
Well, no, hell with him.
If you can't, if you snooze, you lose.
You know what they say, possession is 9 points of the law, right? And now
No,
you possess
really.
it.
Senate Transportation already gave me a donut, so.
Mr. Chairman, although there's no actual explicit rule, it is the custom in the Senate for masculine attire to generally involve dark trousers. And I strongly object to the offering of pastry with confection. And I'm now going to have to enter the Senate chamber. covered in-
Covered with speckles.
So we are gonna adjourn till 10:30, at which point, Council Wasserman will be here